I'm Mark Z, and you're watching Thorin, the best interviewer behind Travis Gafford.
Right, I'm here for another episode of Talk to Thorin, and my guest for this one is going to be Mindbodyesports, also known as his government name, Edward Cleland. And basically, he's someone who has worked with a number of different teams, Evil Geniuses, G2, works with Team Liquid at the moment, if people don't know. So one of the things I want to start right at the whole outset of the interviews, you'll notice I didn't say what you do. I just said you worked with those teams. So on your Twitter bio, it says Pro Esports Health and Performance Optimisation, and then it puts Edward Cleland, Clinical Director. Now, the reason I actually ask this as the framing at the beginning is if this whole topic is about the world of like the mind and how people balance out their performance aspects and things like how do you handle pressure and stress. Everyone knows that blanket term that gets slapped on of like sports psychology, and then they just hear that and they first of all assume everyone in this field is a sports psychologist, which if people don't know, psychologist is like not just a word in the dictionary, it's a literal job and it has qualifications, and even to legally call yourself that actually carries a certain amount of baggage. So where would you frame yourself within this sphere? What aspect, like it's a good description what you do there, but what would you say is, what's the job title, what's your background?
Yes. Hello. Good to sit with you. Been looking forward to this. My name's Edward Cleland, and I am a mind-body medicine practitioner and am completing my doctorate in mind-body medicine, which does overlap with the field of psychology, but is, as you just signified, it's different. I'm not a licensed psychologist, nor have I ever stated as myself as a psychologist or a sports psychologist. So it's a different branch of education. There is a lot of similarities and, of course, studying the mind. But sometimes we say that we study the mind and also the connective response to the body, the psychophysiology. So it's not just studying the mental aspects of performance and health and wellness, but also how they affect the body and how the body affects the mind.
When you say that last part, though, that almost seems suggestive. And part of it, I will say, Edward, is you have got the background like this and your aesthetic. It sounds a little bit hippie. Is there a little bit of sort of like, listen, I'm not someone who shit. Listen, I don't shame people, mate, if it's not like hard science. Like, is there a bit of that shaded in there? Are you in sort of a bit of a other sphere as well?
Certainly, you're fair to suggest that that's where it used to be. When I say mind-body medicine, medicine is rooted in science.
Okay.
And so a PhD in mind-body medicine is rooted in science. It's not rooted in pseudoscience. It's things that are rigorously tested and pass clinical trial. And when we're studying the body and the properties of psychophysiology, for instance, and the gut biome and neurocircuitry and immunology, we're studying things that are rooted in science. So is there some of it that is maybe less westernized in terms of its practice? Things maybe like acupuncture or something like that.
Chinese medicine and these
Chinese
feedback stuff, right? Okay, I see.
Yes, Ayurvedic medicine, traditional Indian medicine is another good example. These are practices that have been ongoing for 2,000 to 5,000 years, depending on their discipline. But only in the last, I'd say, 15 to 20 years have we really dove into the science and proving of those disciplines here in the West in the United States. But I would say it's science-based. It's not something that you can go to a accredited university and pursue academia in it without it being science-driven.
Right. This is actually somewhere I would like to start at the beginning is, in this whole sphere, I think people need to understand that in esports, I imagine it's quite similar to sports. Obviously, it starts with nothing like this. People just play the sport, someone pays you, and then people eventually notice, like, sometimes the best player doesn't always play as best on this day. And then, you bring in either, it used to just be coaches, maybe a coach would be a father figure, or he gets to have a good rapport with the player, and then you build it out and you bring in other staff. You have specific staff that, maybe come from his background or knows. And then the idea is eventually they get to have people like psychologists, therapists, all sorts of different things involved. But here's my basic question. In esports, what I'm trying to get to is, initially, it's not like the first people have to be like top of their field and, like a Stanford graduate or something. Essentially, in my opinion, at the beginning of this field, it's just about efficacy. Can they do something? Can they help? Can they add a little 1%? Can they even give experience to the person? So what I would ask you is this: when we're talking about the aspect of trying to work with athletes, in this case, esports competitors, of how they perform their mind, how they train, etc. How important do you think having a level of like actual accredited qualification is? Can a person just be a kind of like a coach figure and do these things? Do they need to have some level of qualification, you think?
I think there has to be a balance there. Yes. Can you help people without having be clinically trained of how to do it? Of course. But I think there's certainly a lot to be said for education and accreditation and licensure and pursuing formal education to help yourself to be able to better help people. And I'm not one who says just anybody can go out there and be a mental health coach or can be a nutritionist or something like that. Not to speak for my own bias and the years that I've spent as a student and all the research that I've had to do to get here. But I found that to be of tremendous value, but that's not to discourage people from informally seeking out how to better themselves and reading books and watching podcasts. But don't be careful calling yourself an expert in something, generally speaking, even if you have tremendous success in it. If you're truly focused on helping people, you'll find a pathway there. But needless to say, the education is important. I think it's probably overlooked at times in esports and probably needs a little bit more light shined on it.
As I sort of hinted at in the intro, the preamble, I think one of the problems here is the difference between specific technical terminology, like the term psychologist and what that means to have a qualification in this particular field that, as you say, is backed with studies and people have got decades and decades in schools of thought. But there's also the colloquial use that people just basically mean someone who helps you with your mind if it's a bit busted or whatever. So another question I would have is this. Since people have made it like everyone in your role, they just call a sports psychologist. And I notice a lot of you don't have the actual psychologist accreditation. Quickly say, actually, I'm not that. You'll notice I don't call myself that. What I will ask is this. What's the difference people are missing? What's the technical aspect they're missing? And also, I'm going to guess actually in a mistake they're making is the analogy I would give is, if someone doesn't know much about like weightlifting, they're going to go, everyone's on steroids. It's like, mate, the term steroid is like a 1980s relic. Like, even if they are on something, it might not be a steroid at this point. It might be like where you cycle the blood in your, whatever. Like, there's a million new things, but people know colloquially what you mean by that. What they really mean is performance enhancing drug. We just didn't have that term before. So similarly, is it actually necessary? You think is the psychologist part getting people lost? Because it feels like a lot of the people actually who are very good in this role aren't literally trained as psychologists, right?
Correct. Yeah. So psychology is a field of study, and it's specifically dealing with the mind. And there's many different divisions within that. And I think we should take a step back also because we work in a global game. So different countries and different education institutions view these things differently. Sure. In Europe, one may be able to call themselves a psychologist, where in the United States, they have to have doctoral level credential to be able to be licensed in that field and then to retain their licensure. So there's a lot of different steps depending on which culture we're talking about.
Sure. And also the license doesn't always apply to every state in America, et cetera, right? There's a lot of things that right?
Too. Right. Yeah. That too. So depending on what state I'm in, people may look at me as more of a nutritionist in some states in terms of how I teach diet. So it just depends on the state to state legislation and what they actually are upholding. Really in the United States, you just can't go around calling yourself, most people wouldn't call themselves a doctor. Even when I'm finished with my dissertation here, I won't call myself a doctor. That'll be a PhD in medicine. But it won't be something where I'm walking around like I'm an MD, like a medical doctor. Sure. That's a different type of doctor. So that's the other thing too. And I think we need to be careful in esports to be too critical to define what we have to have. There are sports psychologists that I've seen have tremendous difficulty in esports. And there are people who, as you've said, are not doctoral level in the United States psychologists who have tremendous success supporting a team and helping them navigate performance related stress and anxiety and health and wellness categories and optimization for performance. So I don't think it's too important to get really honed in and stuck on the schematics of it. It is important that the people are qualified. And I think that can come from a lot of a blend of different spaces. We as a company have recently considered and utilized former pros and some of their skill sets. But when I'm utilizing Rush with a team like Noun's Counter-Strike, I'm not throwing them in there and saying, here's a psychologist or act like a psychologist. I mean, we're saying, what did you experience, Will, and how can that apply to help these people? And in the same way that there's many physical therapists in the industry who have found themselves in performance type of roles. And that doesn't mean they should be conducting mental health assessments necessarily, but they might be able to help a player in a myriad of ways that necessarily isn't perfectly for physical therapy, let's say. So we're all trying to meet a need as our own practitioner. And I've been a practitioner now for 15 to 20 years, depending on how you want to define it. So A lot of that was morphed when I began working full-time in esports, but they were also practices that are found in traditional wellness and traditional optimization at corporate settings or with other professional athletes. So esports, there was no handbook, needless to say, even if people think they wrote the handbook on it. There was no, and there is no one-size-fits-all handbook for how to treat a esports athlete in terms of wellness or performance.
Right. One thing I think, which is why I set up the whole thing about the qualifications and what yours are, etc., is I think one of the major problems that this particular sort of subfield of esports runs into is, funnily enough, a bigger one that all the non-playing roles in esports are also hampered by, which is you get someone come from an external sector, could be finance, sports, it could be work for the NFL, or they might actually just have like qualification, they might just come out of university, and the person comes in, and even though in terms of that aspect, qualification, experience, outside of the field, they might have the best you could have. Like I said, there's literally people, by the way, in finance who work for the NFL or UEFA or FIFA and stuff like this. But I'll tell you what, the biggest problem they run into is when they come into it, it's like they step one foot into the pool of esports, as it were. And instead of going, well, I have all that, but obviously I've got to learn like this I've got to acclimatize to this new domain. They go, actually, since I haven't been in this domain, there's probably nothing here. In fact, you're all idiots who know nothing. And basically my arrival's sort of like Jesus. I'm here to save everyone who was just here after I came, sorry for the people before, but you'll just have to do your time in hell, won't you? And basically the problem is they don't realize, one, they themselves don't actually have the like underground experience specifically of esports. You've got to kind of like get that, even if you are totally an expert or in other domains, you were the best. And then the other thing I'd say is it's that way of framing it, Edward. It's like the attitude, I think, is what really puts people off, is when you sort of walk in and you make it seem like you are like the shit, but you haven't proven it yet. You haven't shown it in this field, and you kind of hope that people just assume you, right? In your case, one thing I'll say is I didn't hear about you, actually. I think you did it the perfect way, mate. I didn't hear about you until it was in the industry of people like, oh, that team who won those shops, oh yeah, this was the guy who worked with them. Oh, and then now he's in this team. By the way, which is absolutely the best way you could ever do your market. I'll tell you right now. That word of mouth is dynamite. So is this something consciously you did? Because look, we might get to some of them later by inference at a minimum, but obviously there's other people in your field did exactly that playbook I just said. They sort of came in and with the big Billy big balls trying to flex on everyone. So did you consciously not do this? Did you come in slow?
Yes, and made this about other people, not myself, and that is hopefully how people that meet me even now, because what does Liquid care about my previous successes if we don't experience success together, right? So it's not something where you get to rest on your reputation, or yesterday gets to pay tomorrow's bills, so to speak. And for me, my practice as a practitioner is about helping people, and that's what I'm looking to do. So that's why I have a difficult time maybe tweeting frequently. I'm trying to exercise humility. I'm trying to exercise from a position of supporting the people that I'm surrounded by and elevating them individually as gamers and collectively. And that by nature, I think, should not get you a lot of praise. And it is fun. It is fun to hold trophies and go to cool parties and get sprayed with champagne by Nadeshot and all that stuff. That's cool. It's cool and it's fun. But if I'm not reflecting what I'm hoping, and this is what I say to my guys, if I'm not reflecting what I'm wishing for you to aspire to, if I'm not kind of showing you the way, Tao, if you will, showing the way, then how are we going to do this together? So for me, it's about helping others. So there is moments where I get to be in the spotlight and it's fun for that moment, but I'm trying not to make it about myself, I think is the easiest way to put it.
By the way, an obvious other area we should address to get your sense of the field is the other problem people tend to have is either they go a humble approach like that and it's more like someone else says, oh, actually, this person's worked with a few orgs, they've had success, so I'm going to infer they're good. Or they go the other way. They have success. There's an obvious example people know I'm referring to here. Like a team does win a championship or even just a match, and then they go Big pat on the back to me, Obama giving himself a medal meme, you know, like, and obviously the problem with that is I actually think that sets the whole field back, mate, because to me, the best angle you can ever take, I've heard some people do this in interviews, is where you make it sound more, it's like what a coach has to do. If a coach really says it was all me, even if he is the best coach ever, people immediately get their backs up. What they want you to say if you're the coach is this, you know, I do my best to set them up, I train them, yeah, I had the strategy, but you know, the players play, the players win me the championship. So similarly, in your field, I feel like the easiest playbook is why when people fuck it up, I do wonder about their social intelligence. It's just to go, you know, all I can do is help them, and you know, I can maybe help them be the best they can be. So if they're brilliant, then they won the championship. You know, the usual classic line is I did 1%. You know, I added the little extra bit. Maybe I'm the cherry on the top, as it were. Give me some sense. On the one hand, I understand being humble. On the other hand, I'll tell you what, there are players where they might actually have 99% of all the skill set, but actually the 1% is what stopped them win the championship. They come second a billion times. So in some senses, I think the impact can be monumental. Other times, maybe it can be more minor. How would you characterize this aspect? Because obviously you can see, again, if this is part of the marketing, I get why it seems like a good marketing angle. It's just, again, I feel like the reason it puts the field behind us, they're making it sound like they did like 50% of the work, you know, for like the greatest player in the world. So give me your characterization of this aspect. What's the impact level?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've had this conversation with many org owners and decision makers. You know, what percentage of the outcomes do you attribute to the support that you're surrounding with them? So that has to do with not only the day-to-day support, but the practitioners and what type of performance and health and wellness support are you giving them? I think if it was less than 1%, then we did a terrible job. I mean, it has to be well over 1% in terms of the
every aspect, every single aspect you have.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah, is someday said, I really love that he said this one time. We had a particularly difficult season before we won. And he said, I now believe that everything that I'm doing, everything that I consume, everything that I think, everything that I do is making me better or worse on the server. And right. What is that? What percent is that type of mindset to the success of an athlete, or you know, to anybody in business or in something that's performance based, and to have them elevate themselves like that? You know, so I think the answer kind of comes from the team too. There's different people, and I tend to be very holistic, which really loosely means to meet someone where they are. So that's to suggest that different teams have different needs. Different players on the teams view things differently. Some players view esports nutrition to be very important. Some players don't view that to be an element of their success, right? And so I'm not there necessarily to tell them what percentage they have to believe in that, but we map that out for every person and every team and try to move them forward. So it's a difficult thing to say. If I was sitting with an owner and they said, "Do you think you can make my team 5 to 15% better?" I'd say yes, absolutely. You know, and if that's ego or something, that's fine. But I do believe they click the mouse. I mean, they're the ones making the plays, and they have to decide to do it. I've never sat on the server and told a player, "Well, you should pick this champion," or you know, this is how you should run top lane or something. So it's the external things. It's outside of the server things. In the server, you got to play the game. The game's the most important part. Let's not, as practitioners, that is frustrating when I see other practitioners not learn how to integrate the fact that the game's the most important part within their model. Right. And you can't come in and say, well, this worked elsewhere, and so I'm going to jam it into Counter-Strike. I'm going to jam it into Valorant. No, it's we have to figure out what the model looks like to be efficient on the server first, and then map around it.
One thing you're really hitting there as well is I notice people can't comprehend, understandably, they don't have the real life experience, or it's not been shown enough yet in documentaries. They can't comprehend the scope of what you're able to do and how you can influence the athlete or the org and the environment. Because I would actually draw the analogy to coaching. Like the best example is obviously something like League of Legends. Obviously, we're going to talk generally about League and Counter-Strike. These are the games he's working in that I cover. But in League specifically, everyone will know every Reddit thread and Twitter thread is like people critiquing like the draft or which player you signed. And then they make it almost sound like that's all the coach does. All he does is, you know, play some practice games, draft a champion, sign the player, and then, you know, that's it. That's all. And then they think they can judge you. Whereas obviously, if you get to know any really good coach, they themselves have a holistic approach. Like they're thinking about things like what personalities am I putting in the team, or who's the leader, what's the communication structure. Even themselves, they might start to think of things like, do we all get together and do group activities, and do we have like an exercise regime? They start to impinge on that area themselves. So in your field, as you say, you're taking a holistic approach. You're not literally, again, when people hear sports psychologists, here's what they really think, Edward. They just think it means, like Nico's on a couch, and then you're like, so Nico, you've never won Katowice yet. What do you think it is about your childhood that's stopping you from wanting to win? And then he's like, well, I don't know, coach. I think it probably started in 1988, right? Obviously, and this is, like you're saying, there's even things like you are involved with actually the physical exercise people have, or looking into what their diet, like are there things there that set them off, that not making them be able to have like consistency? I'm sure you even look into things like sleep or health aspects, psychological aspects. Obviously, we're not just talking about in the game. We're talking how happy are they with their teammates, where they are in their life. Maybe if they've moved, in the case of some of the players you have, maybe they moved to another continent. Maybe there's a culture clash, or there's so much more in sort of the scope than maybe the initial sports psychologist tag hits, right?
Yes. Yeah. And first off, I hope Nikola gets to hear this, because he'll smile at the idea of him like laying on a couch.
Oh, of course. I picked the most ridiculous example to do for that one.
He would like that. He'll smile if he hears that. He'll smile at that. Yeah, it's interesting what other people, speaking of him, it's interesting what other people's takes are, and what they tell you that you're going to experience with people.
Yes.
You know, and luckily I didn't walk in holding those expectations or thoughts over my players' heads. You know, I still have what I think to be really good relationships with nearly everybody I've ever worked with. So that says quite a bit. But yes, to suggest that it's more than just theoretical, you know, psychology or unpacking their 0 to 18 years and the relationships that turn them into the human they are. Obviously, it's much more than that. Yeah, it's how they move their bodies. It's how they use their voice. It's how they speak to themselves internally. It's some of it has to do with relationships and serious topics of life and really important serious things that don't have anything to do with gaming. But so much of it has to do with how they feel about each other and how they're going to co-create this culture together and succeed. And what does that look like in these working relationships that we spend so much time together in really intricate positions together, and we accept this as our whole identity, and it's complex. And it involves movement and the body and sleeping and eating and everything. It involves everything.
Because I even think, like I alluded to there are even aspects which obviously people can understand how, like the gym and being healthy might like affect in the game performance. But even purely on the psychological field, like I'll give you an obvious example I think your role can be mega useful for, is specifically in teams like in League of Legends where they go and they live in a different city and everyone's in a team house, which is the old model. Whereas in Counter-Strike, at least you can go home. You know, I always tell the Counter-Strike players, when you guys complain, you don't know how good you have it in the sense that, like, yeah, you have to travel a lot, but you come back home and you literally can see your friends and family, like not like someone who's become like your literal friends and family, like back home you can go and see them. Whereas I always think the league players in a sense have it way harder, because sometimes they are isolated, and then people expect that their friends and family are going to just become people in their team. They're like workmates. Like I would just say to someone, use the work model, and imagine I told you move to another city and all your friends have to become your colleagues and your father figure has to be your boss. Like how are you ever going to have a conversation with them where you tell them like, hey father figure, by the way, my boss has been a bit of a dick. Oh shit, that's you. Well, I can't ever have this conversation. So you see the point I'm making? It was actually, by the way, the player who made me realise this was actually High from Cloud9, the old mid laner they had back in the day, because he was a kind of a bit more socially turned on guy than a lot of the others. And what he made me realise was one of the hardest things about doing that job wasn't even the expectation in the game. It was like I say, it's that essentially you had your support network ripped away from you. And at the time, people didn't know how to replace this. Like they would just have friends online or something. So I imagine in your case, you're also spending time essentially having to give these people literal, like almost relationship support. Like they've got to have someone they can talk to and unload on or vent to. And it can't be the teammate and the friend and the coach all the time, right?
Well, a lot of the things are difficult to tell a teammate. You know, in the case of League of Legends, what if the player doesn't speak the same language as their new teammate?
Yeah.
You know, and so now you said you've moved them away from their family and maybe some of their duty, whether it's a military duty and career or something, or some family concept, and now they're completely on different time zones. So yes, it changes culturally everything for them. And then in CS, it's interesting because this idea of going home, first off, what and where is home for these guys after they've spent 75% of their careers now traveling for the last 2 or 3 years, as other friends have moved on in different areas of their life while they've kind of suspended portions of that to pursue this career. So it's very complex, and they are very different. You know, I've worked with some pros in other sports, and no one's ever said, well, hockey players and basketball players will be the exact same, but for some reason they think league players and Counter-Strike players, there'll be a ton of overlap.
Right.
These are completely different experiences. So even within the nuance of each one of these titles, there's a completely different experience, different cadence. Going to LA every week to Riot's very different than, say, what city are we going to qualify for RMR or something next week. So it's very different, and knowing where you're going to sleep next week versus not, and just the lifestyle, it's a very different performance and health load. It's completely different.
Right, here's another way I want to frame this. I'm actually intentionally going to frame this in a ridiculous manner so that when you answer, hopefully it will address or unpack that. The other thing I also think, and this is another thing I can tell you, mate, is a direct overlap to coaching generally, just coaching the game, which is when coaches first began, because this is what's mad for people who are old school enough. I mean, the joke is League of Legends old school, it was 10 years ago. At the beginning, forget sports psychology, people had to be convinced that coaching was a thing, even though it already existed in sports forever. Because their whole thing, if they were a pro player, really was, one, you can't tell me how to play the game, which was never even what a coach ever did. And then two, was sort of like, yeah, but what do you know that I don't know? And so there became this weird onus on coaches where, essentially the first few weeks, whether you sunk or swum, was whether you had a revolutionary, as though you were LS, you had to thought up a new method. Even though I used to tell people, that's not even the job. What you talk, the coach could come in and have known innovations as long as he's great at coaching and he helps communications and, he understands the flow of who should be the star player and who's going to get the resources, how to resolve. That's it. It's like what they've done is tunnel in on one thing and think essentially a bit of an infantile mindset. What's your secret? So I imagine people, to be fair, some of your colleagues have flexed this angle. People will wonder, what's your secret sauce? Essentially, do you have an angle that you are trying to pioneer? Are you just trying to be the best at the current domains that exist and be well-rounded? What would you say to that aspect? Because I feel like some people do think you're supposed to have a secret, even though I'm intentionally presenting it. I think it's a bit silly, If you do have one, obviously.
I do have a bit of a secret. I don't mind stating it either. And people have... I've seen my competitors try to regurgitate it in some ways. And when I say my competitors, I mean organizations that are actively trying to take clients that maybe I'm currently working with.
Right.
And they think that's somehow an appropriate approach, even though I haven't done that to them ever. But, my approach has to do with an individual human, with a gamer, with a teammate, with a team, with an org in the community. And in every one of those areas, I am supporting their mental well-being, their physical well-being, and that could be either, physical being movement or psychophysiology of calmness and relaxation. And we're supporting that person in each one of those compartments in all of those ways. It is very comprehensive. It is very optimized. It really is driven to help them be an athlete and perform well, and really accounts for their individual needs. So I almost feel like, well, good luck to my competitors when they try to do that. It's not an easy thing. I feel like we've been doing this for a long time and have found a way to help people, and that's going well. So the short of it is, I want to help everybody that I can. As an organization, we've been looking at ways to be more involved in education, to be more involved in kind of the grassroots and helping not just the professionals, which, organizations are all very different. Some care a lot about physical health, some care a lot about mental health, some don't care about much of any of it in terms of performance and support. And it's tough not to judge some of the organizations for maybe their lack of emphasis on it. And players know that too. Depending on which organization, we'll get a phone call and say, we want to go to Liquid and we want Edward to be there, and this is what, the type of support we want. And it's comprehensive. It's not just, it's not just for nutrition or mental health or physical. It's for the whole thing. It's to help build the whole culture.
An aspect I also think is tricky is on one level, I always try as an interviewer to obviously put myself in the other person's shoes and imagine what they might be seeing the world as, so I can formulate a question, right? I can understand why some of those aforementioned peers or predecessors of yours did come in the field and sort of be like, oh, it's like the bloody Stone Age in here and I'm like a genius. So look, here's a bridge and a lever. I've got all the tech. Because to be fair, in the beginning, there was none of this. Obviously, it was started off with even amateurs and people who maybe read a book or they had an idea. But my problem is this. I can understand on that level why they came in and thought, right, I'm the shit. But my other issue was, since I'm not actually 15 and I've actually lived a life outside of esports and seen other things in other fields, I also knew the other aspect, which I'll have to say about people coming into esports, which is if you come in and you're like, I've got qualifications, it's like, yeah, but here's the question. If you come from a certain field, sometimes I notice that person's not the best in that field and then they came to esports. So it's like, you might be better than what we currently have, but you might not also be the absolute best at that job. I mean, the obvious example in this field was the reason why I didn't even need to actually hear them say anything when people came in 2015 and said, I'm a sports psychologist who will train all your players who choke to win, is because, mate, if you were actually that good in 2015, you wouldn't be in esports. You'd be like helping some like professional golfer get over the yips or some legendary snooker player who's trying to get back on top after, an injury. So you wouldn't, the money wasn't even there back then. They wouldn't have hired you. So the question I would have is this. To some degree, is it still a fairly primitive field? Like, do you sometimes feel like there's so much to be done? Do you consider yourself one of the best in the world at this job?
I'll answer the first question. I think there's a lot to do in the field. Certainly, there's a lot to do. And you see every organization treating it differently, each event coordinator treating health and wellness and offerings and food options and things all very differently. It's all very fragmented. I am seeing overall an elevated concern from the gamers' end for their mental well-being, for their physical well-being. They are treating themselves like performing athletes. And so we're seeing a higher demand in that, both individually and collectively. Orgs and the community, I think, is very on board with the importance of mental health and the importance of taking care of ourselves. In terms of where I kind of rate myself in the industry, I think I'm surrounded by a few really smart, highly capable individuals. And those are the ones that I'm seeing consistently, such as Lars and some in our inner circle, Ursula as well, who I think are doing really good work. That doesn't mean that there aren't others that aren't currently in the industry. There's some that were doing really good and found that this industry didn't provide them what they needed. Sure. And some of them, stepped away, but they left some models behind too. And I think I'm probably in the category with some of them as well. I do see that we're all advancing the industry and in our own way. And I think we're trying to do good work, but there are, as Richard would say, a handful of charlatans, and it's difficult to navigate some of the industry with them making claims that they make. So much of it's kind of self-proclaimed, whereas I think I've let the players speak for what we've accomplished and the history that I have. I didn't come in saying I was an expert in this. This was, I call it a fortuitous phone call in terms of my history. I had made a name for myself in traditional athletics and working with corporations and building healthy teams and cultures. And somebody said, do you think you could talk to my esports team? And I did for years. And that was the Renegades. And we turned a project into something that was pretty consistent and sustainable with Kassad. And the boys did well, and we grew on that. So as you said earlier, I didn't come in with a preconceived notion like some of my colleagues who said, I'm going to come in under this idea, and then hopefully the marketing plan aligns with what I'm telling people I'm going to do. I came in and just let my behaviors kind of speak for themselves.
By the way, obviously, I'm not going to pretend in this interview we're going to give a primer to your field and what you're doing and your secrets. So we're just going to give a taste for people. But a question I had was, I feel like one of the immediate topics, I was actually quite surprised you said there that even pro players are starting to think about things like nutrition and how do I feel myself as an athlete and how do I model it as I'm a performer, not just because you know how pros are. A lot of pros, because they're quite, I would say they can be quite young in their mind, as it were. Obviously, they've been sat playing a bloody video game 14 hours a day. They didn't have crazy. They didn't have the sabbatical in Europe where they went backpacking, So I often say they're a little bit more like teenagers than they are adults sometimes. And one of the areas I would say that massively is evident when you go to the events is eating food. Some of them really do think of their skill as a static thing, like a fucking Dungeons and Dragons character, and they act like I just have to sit down and perform. And it's like, mate, think about all the variables. So I'll tell you one thing that always shocked me about the Western players, and I'm specifically saying that way for this example, is I've actually been on a team team years ago with Korean StarCraft players and League of Legends players. And I can tell you, mate, there's a famous thing about them, which is if you ever share a room with them, when they open that big suitcase, theirs isn't full of clothes. Half of it is like the literal noodles they eat every day at home, a big thing of kimchi. Essentially what they do, which is genius, by the way, and I can't believe no Westerner thought this for like 15 years while everyone's getting their ass handed to them by the exact same Koreans, is they've literally made the variable of their food identical everywhere in the world they compete. Meanwhile, the joke is they'd be like, I would have a mate who'd be like the best Swedish StarCraft player, but the problem is the event's in Dallas, so he's eating like a triple-decker burger before he goes and plays the game 20 minutes later. Like, oh, I've got it down, top that down with a nice fizzy soda, and I'm into the game. Like, what happened? I don't get it. What the hell? I was just off. I was cloudy. It's like they didn't, but they would never even consider that a factor. They would just be, I played badly or he outplayed me. This aspect, I feel like, I'm glad to hear that actually players are getting on board with it, because I feel like this has been like almost like the elephant in the room in this particular regard. Because as we say, they've done the sports psychology. We've maybe had I've noticed some teams have gotten people going to the gym, but I feel like the last frontier, to be fair, it can be for athletes. I've heard that some athletes still eat burgers and stuff, but I feel like this is like, if you want to tune every variable, this is a big one, right?
Of course. Absolutely. And I would say that it's a much higher percentage that are concerned about it than maybe you would think.
Right.
If at the very top level, they're all cognizant of what they're putting in their bodies. They may not have a perfect plan that they're executing on all the time. And that's a very diverse thing too, because we're not necessarily always running blood panels to find out sensitivity levels to different food groups. We're traveling around the world. Gluten sensitivity in the United States is very different than throughout Europe.
Right.
So there's a lot of variables on the cellular level when you're talking about nutrition. There are some things that we can do categorically, addressing ratios of omega-3 to 9s, which lead to inflammation and chronic pain and things. So if you have a gamer who's continuously experiencing pain, it's not just get them to physical therapy, it's what's their cellular inflammatory level. And I would say, yes, even in pro athletics, there's still some pros that don't view that with enough seriousness. But everybody has, in pro athletics, everybody has a team nutritionist or dietitian and team chefs. And in esports, speaking of the Korean chefs and others, that we have in League of Legends, CS, all of the liquid facilities have dedicated health-related performance chefs that are utilizing local variety in LA and Netherlands. And so these things are, important on the higher level too. 100 Thieves offered myself and my staff a stipend to be able to actually supply the players with things like supplements, blood testing, and things to find out what foods they should and shouldn't consume before and after matches. We were doing a lot of what I would consider cutting edge things that we were doing in professional running or professional athletics. And some organizations, maybe now that they've cut back on budget, I assume kind of like a marketing thing where sometimes in performance, some of that is pretty progressive, I'd say in esports generally now. So they might have pulled back some of those practices, but there is an interest to know what we're eating, why we're eating it, where it's sourced, and how it will help us perform.
A lot of people might not actually be aware, because there's been so many seasons of League of Legends. There's actually that many organizations have won the LCS. I know like in the modern day, you've had like the NRGs and stuff come, and EG themselves have come along, but back in the day, it really was just the big names. And I can tell you, 100 Thieves wasn't even there. They were late coming to the party because they came in the franchising era. And so they were always a good team in the franchising era, but they hadn't won a championship, right? When you came to this team, if people don't know, this team, I actually imagine there was probably a lot you could sink your teeth into, because what people might remember is a lot of the lineup that eventually won the championship, the joke was they were almost all non-NA, like they were all like a mixture of European imports or Australia or Korea, like you say. It seems like it must have been a event, like I can imagine there's so many areas you could attack it. It's not just 5 American players playing. What were the challenges with this team, do you think?
It was a lot of fun. And when you say that, I can imagine myself standing in front of closer, giving him a Conor McGregor speech, and then walking out with Vic and like watching him hit his vape and just kind of chilling with Vic for a few minutes.
FBI, that is, yeah.
Yeah. Very, very different people, and they found ways to do things that were fun together. We had a lot of autonomy with that organization at that time because of COVID and because of the lack of people in the room. My business partner, Dan, likes to say we had the keys of the kingdom in terms of kind of how we would operate as a group. Papa Smithy, after having his first year as a GM and noticing the type of struggles that entails, stepped aside a little bit in terms of the day-to-day energy and what was happening in the room. So those guys really came together. I think some of them were tried and fired through adversity, like Someday. who had a year where he had to kind of go through adversity with friends and make some changes. And certainly, and once again, it's nice to see Vic and Huhi back together again to play together in NRG. So they found a way to work together, and they're both strong leaders. So that was fun to develop. And certainly Abadage and how energized he is. We had a lot of fun. And I think they listened well and knew that if they wanted to do something like win, they had to do something collectively that was together. And there was a lot of self-sacrifice on that team. I was really proud of what we did with that team. And the team before it. I would say the DeMonte Ryoma era, 100 Thieves. I mean, people don't know how hard we were working with the academy level. And it's sad to see where League of Legends is now, knowing how hard individuals like Kelsey and Grayson, who's back again now, Golden Glue, how these guys and women had put in so much effort to kind of build a little bit of a pipeline, but kind of support a culture that we kind of manifested into a championship year. It was really special. Yeah, we had a lot of fun at 100 Thieves. And it was unique because the compound was empty, and I'm sure now it's a lot busier than it was back then, but the streets of Culver were empty, and it was really just us deciding what we wanted to do together and really participating together in that kind of collective experience. It was really fun.
Right, I do notice that on your resume, you have some banger locations where there's just championships coming, right? One of the teams that I want to talk about for obvious reasons is one where the joke is the trophy cabinets got one in, but aside from that, especially Counter-Strike, obviously got nothing, which is Evil Geniuses, the now notorious Evil Geniuses. Now, if people don't know, the reason why it's pretty much only at the moment through me in videos or Richard Lewis in his Substack that have talked about this issue is, as far as I know, almost everyone in EG was NDA'd to oblivion, and so a lot of people just were like, I can never say anything publicly. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to ask open-ended questions, and Edward will navigate it. He will figure out what he can say. So first things first, when you came into this project, obviously you came in this era of the Nicole Point Jamesons, etc. It's like the different, so that people know it's not the Alex Garfield and it wasn't the PPD stopgap between. This is the era people will know now, which in League of Legends had some success. It had a championship and some finals and worlds and stuff. In CS, obviously, it was quite miserable. They had almost no results by the end, and it was actually, I would say that sort of almost tanked the rep of the org in itself. And then in League, obviously, there was the whole thing with Danny, which sort of soured the success there. Right? When you came into this project, what can you say initially about what kind of a org you found, or what kind of a setup? Can you maybe contrast it with other orgs you were in?
Yeah, let me start off by saying I've never spoke ill or negatively about any of my experiences in esports, and I have been privy to what you and Richard might kind of like consider the underbelly, right? Like I've gotten under the hood at these orgs and been really involved in the operations and been an ally to the upper management and really helped them drive their projects forward. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've had success and continued referrals out there, is because the leadership at orgs feel good about working with me. And so that's important to me as well. So I've never found any benefit to speak ill of my experience at EG. But it is frustrating in how I witnessed them treat not only the players that I was trying to help, but also the staff members that were also trying to support the players. And it did stem specifically from one or two people, is the easiest way to put it. So when I came into EG, I had wanted to start the split with them. I had a good relationship with a few of the players there. My time at 100 Thieves had kind of come full circle. It had been a good run with 100 Thieves, but we were kind of looking outside of 100 Thieves at that point. And EG's league team looked like one where I thought, hey, we can continue success here. Let's meet with them. And they were very adamant not to work with me at first, and I found that interesting. And Lindsay brought me on GamerDoc, brought me in March, which the season was already underway. And the mantra at that point was come in and save the spring split. It was come in and save the spring split. And there was no onboarding process or any type of organization in terms of what was going on there. But it was just kind of like, come in and do your magic. It was kind of how I was told, and which in some ways I don't mind, but certainly it was chaotic. And coming in, being made a lot of promises and having to make a lot of concessions, and the way that they wanted me to operate was very confusing. And the Danny situation, obviously, and I'm open to speaking a little bit about, my experience there with Danny and my short time working with him. And the way that I was prefaced when I came in, about Danny and what that work would be like. And immediately, kind of like I would if you introduced me as a sports psychologist, if you said that, I'd say, hold on, that's not what I am. I decided not to go that route in my doctoral work. I did this. This is why, and explain the difference. It's not something to be embarrassed of. It was an intentional decision. So in the same way with them, they kind of expressed what the need was. And I said, that's not really what I do. That's not really my specialty. So if you're looking for that type of support for someone, let's make sure that we find it elsewhere. And we can talk more about that in a bit. But it was very chaotic when I came on. So I kind of came on and just did full triage for the spring split. We, quote unquote, spun the split around, had great success that split. We obviously had the talent, but they weren't working particularly well together at that time. And the relationships I developed with those players at that time was really good. And the EG was the first org to put me on a term contract and say, if you can earn it in the next 3 months. I said, I just proved who I am in the last 4 years. How about a full year contract or something like every other org offers every time? And they said, let's do a 3-month trial. And if it goes really well, we've got big ideas for you, big ideas. And a lot of big promises, which a lot of people have said in the past, they were made as well. And it went really well. And then nothing happened after that. I wasn't rewarded with that big contract and things like they promised us. And it got really tough in the summer split. So happy to answer questions about that.
Yeah, sure. I've got one for you. And it goes like this. How would you contrast even that initial impression and then what the actual working structure was like with other orgs? Because you've been in some of the big, like you said, you've been in 100 Thieves, G2, Team Liquid. These are the biggest orgs in esports. By the way, Evil Geniuses in theory is supposed to be. But I have to say, when I looked into this topic through my own report, dude, I was shocked to find out, wait a minute, for real, it's like 2 or 3 people just run everything. They hire everyone, they promote everyone, they fire everyone, and they sometimes can essentially, kind of like you've heard the stories that Reggie apparently did in TSM, they can just sort of bust in the room and start telling everyone what to do, or like, this is wrong, even if it's not their field. The reason why that shocked me, Edward, is because that's something I would expect to hear 10 years ago. In the modern day, all these orgs, as far as I know, actually, if anything, the thing they don't get credit for is how enormous the staffs are. You do have all these different specialists and all these, like you say, Team Liquid really does have like a chef guy, then they have like a streamer dude who can help you with that. They have like everything. So that's the thing that I'm most shocked by, because that already alarms me, because if I hear it's like 2 or 3 people, mate, you better basically be like the esports org equivalent of like Napoleon. Then if you're going to be like one guy just running the whole thing, you better be some mega mind genius. And obviously, if people look at some of the outcomes, I mean, it's implied these people maybe weren't, and that some of it might even have been some Machiavellian, I don't know, like keeping their own position or hoarding power, or who knows what reason. I'm not a psychologist. I can't figure out what their motivations. I can only infer from external things. Give me some contrast to other orgs you were in this sense. Was this shocking to you that was only a few people running everything?
Very, very. And it contrasted, there's other orgs where there's only a couple of people that are running things. I mean, in most orgs, you have a head of esports who is the puppet master. They may have a general manager or a manager for each title, but at the end of the day, there's only a couple of people that are making most of the decisions. I know we like to, critique the players and people for making decisions, but I think in that way, most orgs have a point person that is supposed to be accountable. So somebody's supposed to be accountable, but
yes.
At EG, I actually felt like we had the correct number of people, which isn't always the case. And I say this with respect to my run at CLG Energy last year, and I was one of the people that wasn't retained. And we knew Energy would slim that down greatly. Taking that over, of course, but there's a set number of people in each one of these teams that I think they're trying to operate within. In EG, there was an owner that told me one time, and I won't out who, but it's someone that I really respect. And we were negotiating a contract with them. And I said, well, EG's rumored to offer us this much money. And it was a large contract. Nicole and Lindsay had both told me big numbers, and we were looking forward to maybe taking them on as a sole client for a year and really revamping their performance. We had a lot of people in CS, a lot of players and staff in CS asking to work with us, and they were knocking on the door of upper management for that. And upper management, for several reasons, I think it didn't empower us to work with them at all. So we just worked in the League of Legends department. But the entire process, when you compare it to how disorganized the other orgs are, the level of disorganization at EG was categorically different. And just how they're running their facilities, how they're treating their players, their payment structure, their ideas of what's what was important and what we should be focused on, how to react to situations. I was constantly in meetings where, because they were essentially paying me just to be a consultant. That's how little they were paying at the end. I was kind of popping in, felt like I was an esports consultant, where I would just not even like sitting there with Danny and one-on-one helping him develop. I was kind of like in a management meeting, because they had a ton of meetings, of course, and sit in one of their meetings and say, why are you doing it this way? And they would say, oh, you think we should do it different? I'd say, well, how about this? And then the next day they would try it completely differently. And it felt very disorganized, and as if they didn't have a guiding compass to lead them in any particular way. And it felt that way when they came out with their third CS roster too. I think in the community, we didn't want to criticize it because we wanted it to be something that was the right thing. Like I had a difficult time with it when it came out. And I was talking with several experts in CS, and they would say, Edward, what do you think about this? And I struggled to understand all of the logistics behind it, and exactly what it meant for competition and support and pay. And as someone who owns a very small business, how are they going to afford this project and do it the right way? And there was a lot of questions, but their level of business acumen, my partner will, I don't know, he'll probably smile at me saying this, but it was the first org where we felt like they were playing business. In every other org, we felt like there was real competency. And I'm not saying that as someone who's being critical of a gender or anything. It had nothing to do with that. I was really eager to work under Nicole. I was eager to support Lindsay's initiatives before I got to know her and got to see what was taking place. So I wanted to be an agent for good underneath them. It wasn't a matter of me wanting control something. So it was a really difficult situation. And when I asked to try to help more, I wasn't allowed to. And I was denied traveling with the team.
Let me ask this to further expand then. That's also one of the things I want to drill down to, essentially. You're right. Technically, there can be 2 or 3 people decide everything. But here's the difference is, like obviously a CEO of a company, a massive multinational company can have one person. But here's the thing, Edward. They don't walk into like the engineering department and go, what are you doing with all that? Get that down. Do the bridge this way. They delegate that role. So in your case, it sounds like a frustration you maybe had. I've heard other people in the org had this. Was like, it's one thing I always want to make clear in my videos is everyone in EG is not an idiot. Like, the problem was some of these people at the top actually were like the bottleneck stopping people I actually sometimes consider brilliant and even Counter-Strike experts or League of Legends experts from having more effect. Or sometimes they'd say like, I want to do this, and then the other person decided, like you say, almost like it was just a movie and you're in that like brainstorm and said, nah, we're going to do this instead, some wild idea, and then you didn't get to enact your plan. Was some of this frustration you had?
Thorin, like nail on the head. There was several people that I would have a call with in League of Legends and outside of League of Legends within the EG ecosystem, yes, like within the structure of EG. And I would come away from the call with them. We'd both almost feel like Twilight Zone. Like, why are we so well aligned, yet we're unable to move forward on this? Whether it was like a coach and I seeing the need for something for the team, or somebody else in a different department and seeing just a need for a completely different approach. And it really felt like we were safeguarded from being a participant, almost as if in case something goes well, they want to make sure that there's an easy way to step into the light from that. And I think the players felt that way when you would talk to the players and ask them, what type of support are you actually receiving and what do you actually need right now? And there would be a large gap between those, and hearing what the players needed. And then when you would correlate that to management and they would own that element, and then you would reconnect with the person and find out nothing had been advanced in that area. And some of it was very important things. Some of it was actually very important and relevant to like the health and wellness of people. So it was disappointing that the onus was taken from them. And then when things started going poorly, they didn't accept accountability, which it's tough to be a leader if you're not accepting accountability after you say, I want the praise for how well this goes. And so I know that they had a tough time with the staff. I think the people that remained at EG the longest were the people that were probably on the bell-shaped curve as far away from a Kassad type. The ones that were most willing to hold their thoughts, hold their opinions, maybe stomach some of the discomfort of their disorganization and poor leadership. It was really tough. But for me as a practitioner, it's particularly difficult when I feel like the needs of a person aren't being met. And it was apparent that the needs of the team and the gamer wasn't met, but it was particularly frustrating for me as a practitioner to see that the needs of an individual were being met when it was discussed.
Okay, right. Let's do some of the specifics then, and you will figure out what you can say and what you cannot. So if we mention, obviously, even just as, the joke is nowadays, I notice no one even says the name Danny because they're so scared of it. It's become like a third rail topic that they don't even want to mention the name like on the broadcast or in any context. They just kind of like pretend it never happened, even though the reason that's so insane to me in this story is he's basically the linchpin of how that team became a championship team and what the whole project of like bringing through talent was and stuff. So to me, he was. It's like what you just said. If only the success had happened, Edward, he would have been the poster boy. But because at the end, sadly, it was a tragic ending to the story, the joke is we ripped down the poster and there never was a poster. Wait, Danny, who? Like, who's that? So the obvious question here is this. This is a player where I know some of the coaching staff and I know some of the players in that team. And I already knew internally, this is not just, this isn't a conveyor belt where it's just your average pro came off the conveyor belt. It's just a young guy, you know, a little bit nerdy, whatever they're going to play the game. No, this was a person where you could tell, I've heard from the first time you meet him, when you see by what he's good at, by the way, he's a very unique person. He's got his own idiosyncrasies, which are not going to be by the by like everyone else. Or there's no like, oh, I've seen a player like him before. I've heard he was a very, very unique case. And in the particular case, as people will see in the reporting, it's not just that, like, you know, he maybe had like issues with the team dynamics or he was having issues on stage. It's like, it seems like almost everything was having an issue with somebody. I mean, at the end, it was even implied nutrition was a factor in this, or things like, did he have people around him as a support network, like I've alluded to before? It sounds like, again, this is someone, by the way, almost desperately needed a holistic approach to figuring out his performance aspect. Can you give me some thoughts?
Oh, yeah, and how you ended that was really appropriate. He needed a holistic approach where the people that were saying they were in charge of his health made sure that he got the help that he needed in the timing that he needed. When I first came on in the very first meeting where I was a part of the team, I was informed by GamerDoc of Danny's condition, and I won't state what it is.
No, sure.
But I was made a parent of what Danny's condition was. And I immediately, and there was others that were a part of this meeting who would acknowledge this as well, I immediately kind of put my arms up and said, this isn't, did you hire me for this? Like for what you just said to we need to address? Because that's not what I do. That's not my specialty. That's not my background. That's not my area of focus. And I was immediately met with this completely like exoneration of me in terms of what I'm going to do with him and how much I'm expected to meet with him. And it was a very unique situation where they viewed as paying almost effectively like for a number of hours from my time. And that it wasn't that I was going to provide everyone a service. I was just going to kind of dance on the project and add my 2 cents in there where it kind of fit. And I said, well, do you want me to, meet with Danny and develop this relationship? And I ended up meeting with 3 times. We had 3 sessions in the spring split.
By the way, just for reference, you were on site. Like in theory, you could have met this person every week, right?
No, that's another bottleneck.
Ah, right. Okay.
Despite my interest of being on site and echoing how 100 Thieves had utilized me for League of Legends and how we had over 2 years found a really good cadence, Lindsay was adamant that I was not to be on site whatsoever. So I was not a part of, obviously it came in during the spring split, so there was no boot camp, so to speak, to be had. And we advocated for a boot camp leading into the summer split and was told, yes, you can have 3 days. And then it ended up being 1 day and being a few hours. And then it ended up being like they were overseeing it while we were doing it. And it became this really muddled thing instead of what we had kind of planned as a performance staff, because others had to have their say in it at the last minute. So needless to say, with the Danny, we had very clear expectations of what we were to do. And it was pretty obvious he was having a difficult time with his team. Going to MSI was a good and a bad thing for that group. I think that they were in need of a reset. We were really excited for a summer split and kind of redoing it. And then through the MSI time period, they tried to renegotiate with the performance staff, and it kind of all went sideways during that gap. So after that, we didn't even work together. I didn't connect with Danny after that, other than a 1-day seminar before summer split, which we actually had fun. I have a photo on my phone of Danny fully buried in sand up to his neck, and we're all kind of hanging out with him. And it was a nice little moment. And then after that, the support was taken on from Nicole and Lindsay, for whatever that's worth. And I'm not really sure what that amounted to after that. I unfortunately wasn't allowed to attend LCS finals with the team. At that point, Lindsay was ghosting me, and I had no communication from management. And she actually hired someone else to come in and let me go. And then she let that person go a few weeks later. And everybody that seemingly had a good year by outcomes and by player ratings found themselves without any type of follow-up, and the performance department basically didn't exist. It's just so interesting, because at times I've never had an org tell me something like, well, don't talk to the coaches, that's my job. And so months later, I would talk to the coaches, and the coaches would go, well, I've been wanting to talk to you. How come I'm not allowed to talk to you? And I'd go, I'm not sure. So there was a lot of politics being played to make sure that certain people were in position to receive spotlight or be decision makers. And I was on the outside. So even when they promised to try to bring me in, then the deal never came through, kind of.
By the way, this actually sets up a perfect question, though, because this is actually not about your experience. Actually, we're just going to speculate and project hypothetically what could have happened. Because the reason why, when you tell me that specifically, that is very alarming, knowing what is known publicly, is the Summer Split is the one where he has all the massive problems. And as Richard always goes to pains to point out, so I'll reiterate it here, he did a tweet after, I think it was after MSI, which basically alluded to the notion that he needed a break already. He did that publicly, guys. Like, he's not, by the way, he's not the guy who runs to do a Facebook post or do a tweet. Yeah, he's the person who actually very rarely ever use social media, if you ever saw. So I almost did see that as like, well, that's a bit alarming. Like, because if you have to think of a normal pro in the literal dictionary terminology, the term normal means like the most common distribution of people don't know. It's not a judgment about the person. But the normal pro, the average pro in the LCS, their position would be the opposite, mate. They'd be like, wait, I've just sort of had my first championship, I've got a taste of MSI, I've seen like Faker and that, like, no, I'm ready to go hard. Let's go hard for summer. Let's win summer. Let's go to Worlds. Let's win. That, if someone who's a rookie's having this kind of that's already a red flag to me. I'd be like, whoa, what are we doing here? And in your case, basically, you're basically already taken off the project, right? I mean, if people heard the stories in summer, it sounds like you could have done your best work with him there.
I would have appreciated to continue working with him, but even then, I would have been looking for additional support, given the context of where we were at with Danny at that point.
Right.
Danny had expressed an interest not to play MSI. I had taken him at that. I had trusted that kind of statement. It certainly Phil and those around him had that feeling with him as well. Vulcan and others around him had the feeling that he didn't want to be a part of that. And without being the need to diagnose it, it was clear he didn't want to be a part of it. So we did have a chat with management at EG, and they assured us that they would handle him, and we took that to be, as a performance staff, we took that to be as they would get him the help that he needs. And you saw Nicole publicly take credit for that. Yes. We're in charge of this, and that actually, I hate to say this in retrospect, but that was reassuring to me at that point to say, okay, good. I've said this is a player who, it's not even that he's not responding to the treatment. Danny and I haven't talked in a really long time, but I don't think there's anything negative around anyone on the support staff, and there was 4 of us. I don't think he had anything negative to say about the treatment he received there. He needed to leave and go do something else.
Right.
And there's been other players where I've seen that. There's players that walk away from professional gaming to go seek mental health or other treatment. So that was the plan during and after MSI. And then we had a summer split where there was really no interaction as a team for the performance support, and the performance staff really was left wondering what the heck how are we going to help these players? And it's interesting too. I mean, you would love to know the timeline of all of this, because knowing that I'm going to talk to you, I do my homework, and I've reread every note that I've ever had with GamerDoc, every email I've had with Lindsay, and all the conversations and the timing of when these things took place and when you're being told better things are coming. And it's such an interesting timeline of when people were basically left out to dry and how things kind of transpired for them in the org. It's mind-numbing that people weren't asked to help and collectively do their jobs together.
Yeah, one thing I would say and pick up on something you said just before this is when you explained the scenario that you win the split, you have this experience at MSI, and you're thinking, right, okay, let's sign like a long-term deal. Let's build on that. Let's do something more. They then basically take you off the project, and like you say, when you kind of look back at the bottleneck aspect, it sometimes feels like the reason why you couldn't be given certain agency was because then if you succeed, then you'll be like, well, it wasn't just you, was it, GamerDoc or whoever it might be? This person did it as well. Now, I would just say, from my experience at talking to so many employees of this org, that actually was the biggest problem, in my opinion. It wasn't even, I don't think, by the way, essentially, this is me, not you. I think these people were just idiots, the people who made these decisions. I think they were just a bit silly, or they were hubristic. They thought they were better than they were, or they thought they were the genius and always the smartest one in the room. And it's not that they were total morons, but that made them an idiot. When you think you know more than you do, and then you attempt to use the knowledge you don't have, you will act in a very stupid way. You do things that are ill-advised. But essentially what I'm getting to is I don't actually think, in the most extreme sense of the word, they were malicious. Look, I actually think the behaviour was malicious if you look at the outcome. But what I would say is this, I think you nailed it. To me, I would diagnose their biggest problem in that org was there were certain people who, for whatever reasons, again, we'd have to speculate, I think were obsessed with the optics of the situation. It was who it looked like was the person who did it. It was who was going to get the credit. It was who was the one who told the person who then did something. You know what I mean? And unfortunately, I don't think they really sat down and went like, this person doesn't need any help and I know better than that. No, I think really their problem, like you're saying, was it was more, they did an equation. It was like, right, so someone's asking me, we need this thing or this resource or this person. But if I give them that though, will that mean that I don't get the credit, or will that somehow divert me and then short circuit around? I mean, I'm just spitballing and speculating. Was this in line with what we're talking about, do you think?
Well, not to sound too philosophical, but people want to believe an idea of who they are.
Sure.
And in order to get to that, there's certain check marks. And in this profession, if you win a title of some kind, that is one of those big check marks where you can say, obviously, I know what I'm doing. Look at all this hardware that I've got on this trophy case. And so when that happens, I think, and you see this at a lot of orgs, when they experience success, people that were associated with that have a bit of an identity check-in, identity crisis for some, where they have to ask themselves, what did I really do and what part of this can I own? And in that, hubris, false pride, it's a good term for that, it comes out. And they say, well, I have to be a part of this so that my identity can be supported. And I think we're talking about people who, again, I'm looking to identify myself as someone who's helping people. And what I see happens is when I focus on that in esports, and I found a good niche for myself to do that, and I understand it well. And when I'm really in that space, hardware tends to be an outcome that I experience. But if I'm thinking about it in terms of like, you know, the outcome first, and say, well, I need to identify myself as someone who's successful, and I identify that as winning a trophy. And then maybe my work doesn't match that. When a success happens, I have a bit of a identity problem with that. And I don't want certain people to get the credit. And I want to make sure that I'm a part of that. And you see that. You see certain people walking in front of cameras or, you know, trying to ride the coattails of a particular player. And maybe at times their support. And you can kind of see right through a lot of it, you know, and it exists. I tweet, you know, something if Nico and I have a trophy together or something, I tweet it too. There's ego that's involved, of course. But at the same time, it comes from a place of insecurity for some people that say, well, I'm not sure that what I did really is even worthy of, you know, certainly being called like the Warren Buffett of esports or something, right? Like if we have to put out the term to convince people of it, then there's probably a reason for that. And so I see that with a lot of people that are trying to support an idea of an identity they wish was true. And in that, they take away the light from others and ruin relationships. That happens all the time.
By the way, would you say, oh, how about this? I can move on in theory to the other team. So I'll just say, is there sort of like, this could almost be like placeholder. Is there anything that you haven't addressed about Evil Geniuses that you actually like to talk? Is there something, I mean, I know this actually happened with a lot of people, just a lot of them did it privately. A lot of people told me, it was actually when the report of me, Richard and Lewis, and some of the things we said came out, it would sort of make them think, oh shit, I have actually wanted to tell someone that. They would just say it privately. Is there something else you want to address about this particular topic? I know it was one that you I mean, the way it played out must have been a nightmare for you. You sort of knew some of it, but then some of it was like, holy shit, that was going on. So what else would you say about this topic?
It was a difficult chapter in terms of all the orgs I've worked with. It stands out as one that was most stressful. I felt bad that the players didn't receive the support they needed, and so many of them are like such lovely players that I've worked with on the side too. Ethan and Automatic, who you had recently, and I still have good relationships with Inspired, Casper, who you had recently as well. So there were so many good people there, and we don't need to have a pity party for organizations running themselves into the ground and people losing their jobs. There's a lot of us that have taken pay cuts in this industry to try to continue to help in our own way. So some people made great money off of EG's ineptitude, but I don't know. I felt like for a long time I decided not to talk about it whatsoever. In private, at times I would confide with other practitioners what my experience was like there and maybe caution them a little bit from what they might expect from there. But I heard so many people that had a shared experience of being lied to or being hurt or not taken care of or respected well. And so I did decide maybe I would wait to kind of vocalize it with you. So I don't feel like there's really anything else that I have a need to like get off my chest or something. It's a time that I look back at where I wish I could have done more. But sure. It was just a really difficult situation. And I hope we learn about it as an industry, that we don't just let people from a level of nepotism or whatever the reason come in and be in charge of people's well-being and their paychecks and their life. I mean, we need to vet people and make sure that we're taking care of each other better. And I say that like, I wish that's what we did. I don't want any practitioner in the space giving us practitioners, a bad rap. Like, I want all of us practitioners to do good work. I want us to help people and be ethical. And so when I don't see that take place, I don't care who it is, it's disheartening. So hopefully as a community, we learn how to integrate those lessons and move forward.
I actually have a question along the lines of what you just said at the end there, which is I noticed also, it wasn't just you, I had a couple of other people actually reach out to me and say, like, I'd be interested in doing something public about this, is what you just said there is the idea of holding each other accountable. Because I'll tell you another thing that I found very alarming, specifically when I looked into GamerDoc, was I noticed it wasn't just someone on their own who just came out of the wilderness and they just set up shop, is they had associated themselves with other people from that exact same sort of like background, and they all, as far as I could tell, like, essentially that became like a red flag, because they said, wait a minute, that's another person I've looked in who was a bit dodgy, or there's some bad stories about, and it's like, it looked like all the semi-fraudulent people or anyone that had any sort of a bad, it looked like they sort of propped each other up, and in a way it was almost like a conspiracy of silence, that if we all agree, like, because we're all friends secretly, if we all agree not to address this, and we just make it, like I say, we make what I said in the intro, like, it's just a big field and everyone in it's a genius and they'll all fix your team, then we all get hired, don't we, and we'll just sort of like, between then we'll figure it out in the teams. I also almost got a sense that some people were afraid to actually say, I think this person's actually like full of shit, or what they're saying's not right, or they've written a book, but if you actually read it, it's nonsense, or they don't want to talk about it. I noticed you and a couple of other people, that seemed to piss you off.
Yes. Yep. As someone who's trying to live a life of being an authentic human and trying to be an honest man and trying to help people and have those be my guiding premises, that is frustrating. The fact that it was a marketing campaign, it was preconceived, that there seems to be, and I don't claim to know all of it, but it certainly seems to be kind of like because of relationships, there was some nepotism there. That's a tough thing to swallow in an industry that we're caring so much about. We want people to be here because they've earned it and propped up because of what they've done in the past and what they're able to bring to the community. So yeah, that's a tough thing to acknowledge. And I'll say you see that in esports though. I mean, players maybe feel a certain way about a player, but there's kind of like a code of conduct to maybe tread lightly around it. And you get kind of like a Howard Stern-ish truth from people, where individuals maybe feel like this is the space where they can empty some of that out. There tends to be a bit of that where, speak no evil and hopefully they won't of me, and they know kind of my darkness, so hopefully they won't share that and I won't of theirs. But you don't get to treat people poorly and then continue on. And that's what frustrates me. If I see a practitioner who isn't living by kind of like the Hippocratic oath, and putting the person first and is putting maybe their insecurity or ego first, that's really stressful. And you have to speak out. You have to be willing and daring to speak out. I feel like I would be a little bit of a hypocrite if I didn't hold us to that standard in the community. And hopefully they hold me to that standard too. I'm willing to, put my academic and my history and all those things out on the table and examine them and make sure that they're worthy of what I'm doing. I'm not afraid of that examination. And meanwhile, some are hiding themselves and trying to do work in the dark and the shadows now. And that's not appropriate. We need to hold each other accountable.
Events come and go, fame rises and then falls away. You have a job, you lose a job. You do one thing, you have to move on to another. But one of the cool things about my career is I have my own support network who's always got my back. So I always know I can rely on support to do the work I want to do and talk the way I want to talk and not have to follow certain rules that others arbitrarily have to follow. And that support group is, of course, called the Illuminati, my Patreon community. This video and all the others on my channel was kindly supported by Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Frisky, Ahmed Hadjou, Tobias Bernasconi, Thooorin, Tosh, Jensen Goh, Animosity, and you know it, always my main man Jerky's minion, rocking with me, ride or die. Would you like to suggest a topic or a guest for a future episode of Reflections or a talk show? Do you want teasers? Find out who the upcoming guests are? Maybe you want to ask me a question for my video AMA where I tend to go quite in depth, or perhaps you want to take part in one of those really long donated discussions where we talk about whatever you're into in esports. Well, if any of those perks or any of the others catch your fancy, join the Illuminati today via the Patreon link in the description box where? Down below.